Hey everybody, it's Party Elite, and today I wanted to talk about some of my favorite games from 2019, particularly in the genres I cover on the channel: strategy, city building, and simulation. It's always hard to make a list like this. Looking back at the year and picking out just a few games that have made a good, lasting impression is no easy task, but I feel like of all the releases this year, there are a few that keep coming back into my rotation, have never left, or at least clearly won't for a long time. To keep the list from blowing up and just including everything I played this year, I've kept it to a top 5 with a few honorable mentions, and I've also restricted it to games that became first playable by a purchasing audience in 2019. So nothing that's been in early access for the last however many years, only to get a full release this year. Hopefully, there's something for everyone, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts as well. So if you've got your own list of favorite games in these genres, let me know in the comments down below, as I'm always curious to see what others think. Without any further delay, here are my top 5 strategy, city building, and simulation games of 2019. Sitting at number 5, Total War 3 Kingdoms did a great job of bringing the Total War formula of turn-based empire building and beautiful real-time battles to China during the Three Kingdoms era. It's beautiful, probably the most beautiful game on this entire list, with art direction to die for and a lighting engine that brings a tear to my eye just thinking about it. It does amazing things for the campaign as far as diplomacy and character-centric mechanics and systems are concerned, and it is exquisitely art-directed, written, and executed. Unfortunately, while the campaign side of things were absolutely amazing and had some great developments and made you really feel like the warlords you were playing as, I had a couple of issues with the battles and the UX that I just simply couldn't look past, and the focus on the fantastical romance mode, especially for multiplayer, was a bit of a letdown. The multiplayer scene felt pretty dead on arrival as well. With that said, I enjoyed Three Kingdoms, and the single-player experience with all the new and improved mechanics and character depth draws me in consistently. The different warlords have different strengths and weaknesses, and their starting positions lend the game to slightly different approaches depending on where and which faction you're playing as. This helps combat the relative sameness across the board with units and battles. The uniformity and monocultural approach is quite the weakness here. The Eight Princes DLC breathed some temporary life into it again, but now it lies dormant once more until the next content drop. Mechanically, this game changes some very important things for the Total War series, changes that I hope will be implemented in the future, especially when it comes to the focus on characters, character relationships, and the depth of diplomacy between warlords. So it sits comfortably at number 5, because when it's good, it's fantastic, and at its worst, I'm just waiting for more content, and it's not a bad spot to be in at all. Coming in at number 4 was my first foray into the popular Age of Wonders series. Age of Wonders Planetfall released in August and brought the long-running franchise into the sci-fi genre. Blending a Civilization-style empire-building layer with an XCOM-style tactical battle layer and RPG-style leveling mechanics, the game tries to do a lot at once, which can be overwhelming at first, but is definitely worth the learning curve in my opinion. 6 factions, including everything from space dwarfs to bugs to cyborgs to the 1%, can all be blended with one of any number of secret technologies, all of which unlock unique options of their own, including more units, unit mods, and additional tactical and strategic options. There are a handful of single-player campaigns to play which collectively tell the story of the era, and you can also play scenarios, which are sandbox games that allow you to customize victory conditions, rule sets, the map you're playing on, the enemies you're up against, and even the turn types from the classic turn-based style to simultaneous turns. I think my biggest draw to the game has to be in how it manages to blend grand campaign empire-building play with the tactical battle elements, something I've always wanted games like Civilization to do, and I'm a big fan of the variety of units and playstyles that we see as well. It's certainly built around the concepts of asymmetrical balance, and while I wish the game pushed that a little harder at times, it does a good job of creating a decently different experience every time you mix and match a faction and a secret tech, with more of both coming with added DLC. The RPG elements add really nice touches as well, with new commanders joining your ranks as time goes on, gaining levels, and unlocking new skills for you to take advantage of. But that's not all. You'll also encounter NPC factions that assign you optional side quests and corresponding rewards, adding yet another layer of role-playing. And finally, the ability to mod units with various upgrades that you unlock through completing missions and researching technologies is a nice way to customize units to fit your playstyle and add even more replayability per faction per secret tech. You'll find yourself customizing different units in different ways depending on how you intend to use them, and I've been a fan of unit customization since I first came across it as a kid in Alpha Centauri. The game falls short in how far it pushes each faction and each secret technology. There needs to be more variation in tech trees, whether it be for martial or societal aspects, and there needs to be more units, more mods, and more of everything really. The repetition becomes particularly evident when you've played a couple of scenarios back to back, but that doesn't mean it isn't a fun game to come back to in single or multiplayer, as I have done a few times since release. Again, there's a fair bit of variety, and I quite like the variety, but eventually it starts feeling a little same, and I really wish they'd push those differences even further than they already have. In at number 3 is something with a lot less war and a lot more saving the world. Planet Zoo only recently released in November and instantly won my heart. While I'm certainly partial to cute fluffy animals, the game does a great job of bringing the fantastic customization options we've seen previously from the devs in Planet Coaster and implementing them into a very different kind of simulation. Focused around conservation efforts, the game does a great job of educating players on various global issues as well as the animals that you'll be taking care of. But conservation comes at a cost. Everything from food and toys and the construction of enclosures themselves all cost a fair bit, as do the salaries of all the vets, mechanics, caretakers, keepers, security guards, and vendors you'll need to hire to keep things running smoothly. These costs are countered by getting donations from guests who are impressed by your zoo and the happiness of the animals within them, and by all the standard elements you can expect of a game like this: merch stores, a variety of food and drink stalls, ticket prices, etc., etc. Where the game truly shines is in its customization options and its openness to player creativity. Whether you're playing the completely open sandbox mode, the focused campaign mode, or the franchise and challenge modes that blend sandbox with a real growth and challenge curve, you'll be able to research, unlock, and use a variety of parts and pieces to build enclosures and decorations to your heart's desire. With precision placement tools, you can build everything from custom facades for stores to unique viewing platforms to all manner of insane climbing platforms and enclosures experiences for your animals and guests alike. And honestly, it's really awesome that guests seem to understand some of the crazier viewing angles that you set up for them. The number of pieces is astounding, and it covers everything from different types of planks to different types of roofs to letters and shapes and even special effects like waterfalls and rapids and more. There's great workshop support integrated as well for those who would prefer to focus on specific elements while relying on the community for others, and on top of all of this, Planet Zoo does a great job of rendering these animals and showing their relationship to one another and the environment around them. From simple things like being able to drink water from a bowl or from a regular body of water like a pond or a lake, to being able to move around complex pieces of terrain. There's just a certain pleasure to be drawn from seeing these excellently rendered animals interacting with the world you've made for them. Yes, every once in a while they glitch through or they don't exactly understand what's going on, but I feel like with how much is being done, a little bit of that can be forgiven. I'm a fairly forgiving person when it comes to these kinds of things, especially when you consider just how much is done well as far as the animals are concerned. And for those of you who are less interested in building and more so in animals, there's of course plenty to do there too. From researching what makes them tick and how to keep them healthy, to investing in better gene pools and ensuring the best offspring, animal management has a ton of depth as you try to obtain endangered animals in order to rehabilitate or foster more of them in order to release them into the wild for conservation credits, an in-game currency similar to money, though it's unique in that it's used exclusively for animal purchases, especially when working towards high-quality endangered animals. Please note, despite me using the term in-game currency, there are 0 microtransactions to worry about. It's by no means a perfect game. The system for building paths is one of the most frustrating I've ever dealt with, and the animal trading center is often slow and clunky in franchise mode especially, which is really unfortunate considering the importance of that particular menu in a game like this. There are also some strange exclusions in the base game. Not including polar bears and penguins, for example, seems deliberate for the purpose of DLC, which in fact, as far as at least polar bears are concerned, we found out already. So it's a little strange to exclude some of these, very endangered animals who are very much threatened given the current state of things, and excluding them in the base game that's supposed to be about conservation. Kind of strange. But I suppose you have to draw the line on which animals to include somewhere, right? If you're into management games or have any interest in this type of meticulous creative expression, it's very easy to look past these issues, and I can wholeheartedly recommend what I'd say is maybe the best non-city building simulation game of the year. Number 2 takes us to World War II with Steel Division 2, which, having released in June after a few delays, is the sequel to Steel Division Normandy 44, which in turn is a spin-off from a series of games that is perhaps one of my all-time favorite series that still challenges me to date, the War Game series. Pedigree aside, Steel Division 2 takes us to the Eastern Front in World War II, blending deck building as well as real-time and turn-based strategy gaming to create some truly epic moments. Primarily focused on the Russia versus Germany situation, the single-player campaigns tell the story of the major push from the eastern side towards Berlin, and they do so by blending turn-based strategic movements of military assets with the fighting of engagements in real time, with reinforcements and troops reflecting the positioning of troops on the strategic map. The battles are the bread and butter of a game like this, and so when it comes to multiplayer, that's the focus. Steel Division 2 divides the playable nations into their corresponding historical divisions, each with their own specializations to match. Players can either pick randomly generated decks to take into multiplayer games, or they can go through the deck building process where different divisions will have access to different units of different classifications at different costs and quantities. And each of these units have a complex set of stats, from armor thickness on various sides to armor penetration on different ammo types to weapon types and speed and stealth and recon abilities and more. And honestly, this complexity of stats is what makes this series really stand out to me, where you have to really think about what you're up against, what you have access to, and how and when to use which tool. I love it. Now, building a deck to suit your playstyle is lots of fun as you grow familiar with the factors at play, and experimenting with the plethora of options is fun in and of itself. Once on the battlefield, the engagements are divided into 3 phases, and your deck builds will take advantage of different phases in different ways depending on the strategy you're coming in with. You acquire points every minute that you can use to deploy reinforcements, and before you know it, a once pristine landscape pockmarked by villages has become a ravaged hell pit pockmarked by craters. From infantry of various designations, to tank and anti-tank teams and vehicles, to morale-boosting leaders and commanders, to recon squads and snipers and dive bombers and dogfighters, the multitude of units in their variety of roles each have a time and place to shine, and that massive set of possibilities is what makes a game like this really shine and really replayable. Honestly, some of my fondest memories of gaming this year are from our community live streams, where we had massive 10v10 engagements, coordinating artillery strikes, calling in air support while taking out anti-air, planning infantry rushes with armored support. There's some really great team-based fun to be had. Add to that the fact that this is a beautiful game where you can zoom right down to watch each individual tank if you so wish, and you have a recipe for success among a niche audience. A beautiful game with extremely complex mechanics that's great fun with friends. I wish the single-player campaigns were more fleshed out, and launching the game without a solid set of tutorials was certainly a shot in the foot. A game this complex is daunting for newcomers. Multiplayer could also have used more maps, and while balance is a constant struggle for games like this, there were definitely some frustrations at launch that should have been spotted pre-launch. Still, even though I haven't had a chance to play it in a while, Steel Division 2 remains one of my favorite games of the year, and one I definitely want to dive back into with the community in 2020. I can highly recommend it for anybody interested in the era or just in a solid, unique, and challenging strategy gaming experience. Before we get into number 1, there are a few other great games from the year worth mentioning that just didn't make the cut, but were a ton of fun while they lasted. Battlefleet Gothic Armada 2 was an epic game of epic proportions set in the grim, dark future of the Warhammer 40k universe. Launching with all the factions one would expect from the universe, it gave us intense single and multiplayer space battle action with gorgeous visuals and some great flavor. Asymmetrical balance was fairly well executed outside of a few annoying factions and setups to play against, and though there were some issues with progression, the overall experience was great, and I had a ton of fun playing with the community. Unfortunately, the developers shot themselves in the foot with a macro cannon when they sort of messed around with the multiplayer game modes that had ranked systems, and that seems to have quickly resulted in a rapid decline in player count, which in turn means matchmaking was slower, which, paired with a lack of any real competitive scene, because they were missing replay and spectator features, which is honestly a must-have for a game like this. All that together ultimately drove the popularity of the game right down. It's honestly sad to see, but I do still occasionally get the itch to dive back in for some multiplayer nights with the community, and honestly, maybe sometime in 2020, we do that. Anno 1800 was an early release this year, taking the Anno city building series back to its historical roots after a decent foray into sci-fi, futuristic city building. The game was great, a fun, albeit short story-driven campaign coupled with the sandbox modes. You were pit against other industrialists in this era of rapid technological and territorial conquests. Between the old world and the new world, there were a plethora of building chains and production chains to manage, each with their own pros and cons, and the NPC factions would either compete with you, often violently, or offer you quests that would have you chasing after various non-city building missions. From keeping people happy to building efficient production chains, to managing exports and imports between continents, to fighting naval battles, to going on choose-your-own adventure-style expeditions for artifacts and exotic animals, Anno 1800 gave players a lot to do, with DLC releasing to add even more, including entirely new regions, transport systems, population types, and corresponding needs, wants, and production chains. This was a hard one to exclude from the top 5 because I love its complexity, but I think that same complexity turns to tedium in the late game, which is what seems to have stuck most in my mind. With that said, it's still a load of fun and absolutely worth checking out if you enjoy a good, complicated city builder and economy simulator with great depth. Now, maybe a bit of a surprise in number 1, but this is definitely the game that has kept me as hooked as when I started playing it months ago, right until now. It's one of the few games this year that has me thinking about it when I'm not playing it, and how can I deny such an impact the number 1 position? Workers and Resources Soviet Republic is definitely a bit of a dark horse. It released into early access in March of this year, and while I typically don't consider early access games as something to highlight because of their incomplete nature, Workers and Resources is one of the extremely rare exceptions to that rule. This indie city builder has a very active developer that has been putting out relatively consistent updates, each one making big strides in development, with a Trello board that suggests there's a lot more to come. Set during the 60s through the 80s, the game has you building a Soviet republic. Calling it a city builder is almost a misnomer, as it's actually a nation builder. The maps you're presented with are absolutely massive, and they give you a ton of space to play with. A variety of natural resources are required in order to produce the basic needs of your people, and while you can import these goods from other communist and capitalist nations, you'll find yourself quickly running out of money if you don't build a self-sufficient country. From bread and meat to clothes, electronics, and vehicles, the list of products to import, produce, or export is quite large, with impressive plans to grow that list over the course of development. The developers also intend to implement a supply and demand system for goods, so the value of goods will fluctuate over time, forcing you to diversify your production. On top of that, the cost of building has been wonderfully implemented as well. You're not just putting down zones for the computer to randomly build in, you're selecting specific buildings based on their cost to produce and their output. You're placing them on a plot of land, you're determining their connections to roads, footpaths, conveyor belts, and factory connections, and then you're paying for every step of the way, unless you're able to produce all the raw construction materials as well as the workforce required to build said structure and infrastructure entirely on your own. It's insane. I don't think I've ever seen this in a city building game where you can actually literally produce the bricks that are going to be used to make a giant steel factory that'll make the steel that's going to be used to turn into automobiles. It's ridiculous the scale at which this game is operating, and that's what really brings it up to this rank 1 position. The modding community is also surprisingly active for an early access game. With everything from vehicle skins to new buildings being released on a regular basis, there's a lot of stuff to keep going back to keep improving the nation that you're building. Now, sure, the game has some flaws, that much is undeniable. It's an early access. It'll often test your patience as you go about investing in terraforming the land to fit buildings the way you need them, and its demand for realistic infrastructure can sometimes lead to winding roads or expensive rebuilds of areas, but in that very same adversity, I've found a certain charm. Think about the real world. We don't just flatten entire mountain ranges in the real world, and we don't just stick support beams in the middle of a road, so why should we in a simulation city builder? It certainly isn't the prettiest game either, but honestly, there have been few things as satisfying for me in gaming this year as building an entire system to produce everything from gravel and asphalt to steel and mechanical components, and then watch new parts of my nation get slowly built with minimal imports when needed. Pavers paving, rollers rolling, dumpers dumping, and cranes, craning, all while off in the distance a giant rail bridge gets built. There's honestly just far too much to be said about this game, and despite its occasionally frustratingly particular building and infrastructure placement requirements, it very easily takes top spot for me without hesitation, and it is a city builder I can highly recommend for those interested in the game. I can't believe I'm saying this about an early access game, but there you have it. A game that I was only going to cover for about 10 hours under the title of a mini Let's Play, but instead, I'm nearly at my 60th episode with no desire to stop playing. Workers and Resources, Soviet Republic. Best of the year. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and I hope that looking through some of my favorite games of the year has maybe given you some ideas on what to check out next, or maybe go back to. Like I said before, I'm curious to know your own favorite picks of 2019. Anything here that you think shouldn't be here? Anything that you would have liked to see on this list? Let me know in the comments below. Now make sure you subscribe to this channel for more strategy gaming content, including reviews, previews, let's plays, and more. A massive thanks goes out to all of my channel members and patrons for supporting the channel on a monthly basis, and a huge thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.